for sale in Metro Denver saw a big boost in April. More listings and a slower pace of closing contributed to a jump in inventory. A big jump in new listings and a modest increase in closings helped to drive up the number of listings available to buyers in the Denver Metro during the peak home selling season, according to a monthly update from Denver Metro Association of Realtors. A year ago, buyers in Denver had 4,632 home and condo listings to choose from. 2 years ago, only 3,204. At the end of last month, there were 6,990 active listings on the market. Also in the news, Governor Poulos, Dems, on verge of a real step forward on housing as land use bills sail towards the finish. Senate passes centerpieces on a 5-bill package, putting transit-centric density measure on path to law. The Colorado legislature is poised to pass a suite of marquee land use reform measures that promise to reshape housing development along the Front Range, delivering a significant win to Governor Jared Poulos and legislative Democrats a year after their first reform attempt collapsed. On Tuesday, the penultimate day of the legislative session, the Senate passed the House Bill 1313. It requires Front Range local governments to set density goals near transit-rich areas, and then demonstrate that they're hitting those targets. The bill is the centerpiece of a 5-part land use package, and after winning a swift procedural vote in the House later in the day, it's now headed to Poulos for full passage into law. Quote, "This is a tremendous victory for affordable housing in Colorado," end quote, said Representative Stephen Woodrow, a Denver Democrat who was among several sponsors of the bill. Quote, "We've known for some time that we need denser zoning by transit, and this bill delivers," end quote. Late Monday night, 12 hours before the transit density bill passed, the Senate also gave final approval to House Bill 1152, which generally allows for accessory dwelling units like garage apartments and granny flats to be built on single-family properties in Front Range cities. That measure awaited procedural vote before moving to the governor's desk. Poulos has already signed House Bill 1007, which bans local residential occupancy limits that aren't safety-related. He's also expected to sign House Bill 1304, which limits how much parking local governments can require for developments near certain public transit corridors and routes. Final piece of the land use package is a bill requiring local governments to undertake regular housing studies. It's still moving through the House, though that measure, too, was expected to clear the legislature before the session ends Wednesday night. Colorado legislature, bill giving government's first crack at some housing, advances. Senate leader reflects on Democrats' majority. Lawmakers moved legislation on land use policy, property tax reform, immigrant IDs, wetlands protections. Colorado House and Senate convened on the penultimate day of the 2024 session Tuesday as they rushed to wrap up legislation on property taxes, gun regulations, housing, land use policy, transportation, and other priorities. That includes a property tax relief bill that was unveiled Monday. Here's one of the Democrats in the chamber who served while his party was in the minority. Senate President Steffenberg, who's finishing the better part of 3 sessions, leading the chamber and its term limited from running again this November, reflected on his 8 years in the legislature during his last regular media availability Tuesday morning. He's one of 3 Democrats in the chamber who served while the party was in the minority, last in 2018. After this session, every Democrat in the legislature will have served only in the majority. Fenberg, a Boulder Democrat, said his 2 years in the minority helped him appreciate what it can feel like having no voice for yourself or your constituents, and the need to protect the minority's voice. Quote, I think I learned so much, and I'm so grateful that I was in the minority for 2 years, end quote. Thunberg said, quote, at the time, I hated it, but looking back on it, it was incredibly helpful, and it shaped who I am as a legislature because I knew what it was like not to have a voice. I knew what it was like to have relationships with the other side in order to get anything. It can be problematic to have an entire majority legislature that has never experienced that. Yeah, this one's a little off topic, but with the session closing and so much going on, it'd be good to see how the session closed.
Fun? You call that fun? That was boring.
Let us move on. Snowmass Monastery listed for $150 million with Denver Ranch Group. One of the largest tracts of largely undeveloped land in Peking County recently hit the market for $150 million. St. Benedict's Monastery is for sale, nearly a year after the monks announced its impending closure. Quote, we're really looking forward to a conservative buyer or buyers that understand the nuances and pristine nature of the property, said the listing agent Ken Murr of Murr Ranch Group. Quote, we don't see this as another resort or large-scale, high-density development. We see quite the opposite, end quote. Commentary. And yet, our greatest housing need in a housing crisis is the density. Understand that we can't just be spoiling the most pristine parts of our world just because we're in a hurry to develop stuff. We need to protect them. And I can especially appreciate that in areas away from the centers of populations. Denver Youth Homeless Shelter set to open in July. Oh, I'm going to redo this because I got my thingy in my ear. Get rid of this. Recording. Denver Youth Homeless Shelter set to open in July scales back costs after losing wage dispute. Urban Peak, which building a full-story 136-bed shelter for young people ages 15 to 24, will have to pay an estimated $2 million in labor costs after losing its appeal. A Denver nonprofit building, a 4-story youth homeless shelter, will have to dip into its furniture, equipment, and staffing budget after losing a wage dispute that added an estimated $2 million in costs ahead of its projected July opening. Urban Peak paid its construction crews for the $40 million building at residential rates instead of business rates. Commentary. What are they trying to do? Make these folks homeless by underpaying them? This is partly what happens when you have a corporate structure that relies on volunteerism and not understanding the cost of what it takes to do stuff. Rather than paying fair wages for labor, lots of nonprofits expect the people to take less than fair wages or work as volunteers. It's no wonder why they would carry this kind of thinking and then translate it to contractors that they're working with. I wonder why the contractor's not responsible for paying the labor. Isn't that what they're supposed to do? I need you to do this job. And if you have people that you hire to do it, you pay them, so bid me accordingly. Right there. The nonprofit appealed the decision to a hearing officer appointed by the city auditor, who sided with Denver Labor. The determination that Urban Peak's 136-bed shelter for young people ages 15 to 24 was classified as a business construction. The determination that Urban Peak's 136 bed shelter for young people was classified as a business construction came as shock to most involved, including the project developer and even the city department that provided the $16.8 million in funding. The project's developer, Christian Pritchett of Blue Line Development, testified that he and the general contractor, as well as some subcontractors, were flabbergasted and shocked to learn of the business classification. Testimony also showed that the city's Office of Housing Stability told Urban Peak that shelters were classified as residential, not commercial. Commentary. Isn't this the kind of stuff you settle before you break ground and you don't start the building until you can count the cost? Let's move on. Lawsuit by unhoused Lafayette father over city's lack of indoor shelter dismissed. The claim that Lafayette ordinances prevent him from sleeping outdoors amount to cruel and unusual punishment was tossed just before a U.S. Supreme Court took up a similar case. Colorado's U.S. District Court dismissed the lawsuit filed by James Holmes Sr., a homeless father in Lafayette who claimed the city should be required to provide indoor shelter for him and his teenage son. Magistrate John Susan Prose dismissed the case because Holmes did not file an amended complaint in a timely manner. Quote, failed to communicate with the court in any way since November 14th, 2023, end quote, according to the court order. The case was dismissed without prejudice, which means that Holmes can refile the case at a later time. Apparently, do his homework, he can have a case. Oh, I do have commentary. It's very difficult for poor folks to file, maintain, and follow through on cases and lawsuits. Unlike large institutions, I mean, the filing of paperwork seems to be half of their business. It's expensive, takes a long time, and the poorer you are, the less stable your life is, and the less likely that you'll be able to follow whatever the procedure is in the first place. It doesn't take much to have a disruption come along and prevent you from being able to follow through on, I guess, what you'd call routine paperwork. And yet the courts and stuff are quick to chastise people for not being able to keep up with that. So, ugh. Here's Mayor Mike Johnson's plan to make downtown Denver the most vibrant city center in the country. Quote, economic recovery of 10 states starts in this neighborhood. Commentary. Let's start out there. Plan to house all them homeless folks out of the streets didn't work out so good for you, did it, Mr. Johnson? But to be fair, there's been improvements, and the improvements haven't been to the scale of the need. So I'm certain that they were hoping that they could sell themselves on making Denver the most vibrant city, since the other plan didn't go according to plan. As a way to distract them. Hey, look at this shiny thing over here. Mayor Mike Johnson is trying to fulfill his pledge to make downtown Denver the most vibrant city in the country. Commentary. Notice how the pledge isn't just to make downtown Denver a vibrant place, or to make it the most vibrant in the metro area, but to make it the most vibrant in the whole country. How many mayors making these same statements about their plans to make their city the number one thing in all the country? They seem to have a habit of making false claims about making their city the biggest, the richest, make it the gooder, the better. When are we going to realize that claims like this are empty brags? Let us continue. Right now, he knows the area is struggling, and while some families are happily living there, others in the region have mixed views. Commentary. By trying to make it the quote unquote best, a lot of people who live in that area won't be able to afford to live there later. So they'll be gone. You're not improving that community for the people that are living there. You're improving it for the ones that you hope to replace them with. Remember that condo, that two-tower condo we talked about just a few articles earlier? They're going to be replacing the people that already live in the area, because when the housing prices shoot up even more, people are going to have to leave. He's not making it better. It's not for the people that live there. Johnson points to shutter businesses, empty offices, unsheltered homelessness, and a spike in fentanyl use. Quote, I think cities across America are facing a shared crisis as offices and downtowns have struggled to recover post-pandemic, end quote. Many are wondering, will our downtowns ever recover again? Should we just give up on them as some relic from a bygone era? Commentary. If you ask me, it sounds like you already are. To heck with the folks that are there. Let's replace them with something else. As Johnson sees it, to make downtown Denver vibrant, the city needs to invest $500 million towards revitalizing it. Why not just build some housing? Commentary. This guy is not a city council member. This is Walter Eisenberg, CEO of Sage Hospitality. He's one of the guys in the cigar room. I would not be surprised at all if he's with that Concerned Colorado group that gets a special private audience with the mayor. No doubt he'll do a lot of dictating about what the redevelopment looks like.
What do you think?
All right, let's go see if we can find this quote. If Johnson has his way, downtown won't be just a playground for the wealthy. But if Walter Eisenberg has his way, it'll solely be a playground for the wealthy. Restaurant workers who won't be paid by Walter Eisenberg and his associates, they'll be paid next to nothing, will be able to afford apartments close to their jobs. No, they won't. They're lying. They're building stuff that costs $400,000. They're not building budget stuff. First-year nurses will be able to enjoy the fruits of the city center. No, they won't. They'll have to ride the train to get into the center of town. And retirees will be able to safely relish their golden years. Only if they're independently wealthy. Then Eisenberg wants to transfer that money into his pockets. Sorry about the rant, folks, but Eisenberg is not good for the people. And on to the next item. Colorado lawmakers end session with camaraderie, finalizing property tax reform, though not all is resolved. Land use changes, Tabor reform, and tax credits all cross the finish line on final day. Unlike last year, the end of Colorado's legislative session Wednesday came with no fireworks, no protest walkouts, no inter-caucus tensions boiling over into the public, no last-minute implosions of Keystone policy bills. On the final day of lawmakers' nearly 4-month session, instead was dominated by noticeably brighter spirits as the General Assembly put the finishing touches in on a slew of legislation that had dominated the final weeks. Notable bills touch tax credits, property tax reform, gun restrictions, and major land use changes that will shape the state for years, supporters hope, for decades to come. Contentious housing bills. Commentary. Every housing bill that they will pass is always contentious because it's always fought by the business community who just wants to exploit the people that are living there. Let's go back to the article. Contentious housing bills that died or were vetoed last year were brought back in varying forms and passed. Lawmakers and governors struck grand bargains to diffuse ballot measures, and Democrats settled into a now familiar, if not consistently united, seat at the head of the legislative table. Some of the last proposals to cross the finish line on that day, which ended with the state's adjournment just before 8 p.m., before dark, included an income tax credit for Colorado families, household incomes under $90,000 to cover up 2 years of tuition fees at in-state public universities, colleges, and technical schools, to cover up to cover up to 2 years of tuition to cover up to 2 years of tuition fees in in-state public universities, colleges, and technical schools, a bipartisan bill to remake the public school finance system, a series of tax reforms that included a tax credit of up to $3,200 for dependent children, scaling down as family income increases, as children age, and as state revenue growth slows down, and an income tax reduction of $450 million this year. When the legislature convened in January, it was with a palpable sense of dread. Lawmakers, lobbyists, and observers feared the session would reflect the angst and tension that marred last year's regular and special meetings of the General Assembly. Instead, the session unfolded largely as a casual observer would expect. Commentary. And what we expect is wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Nichols Hotel would include one existing structure, not two. This was republished in the Denver Post from Business Denver, which I do not have a subscription to, but I have a subscription to the Post, so I'm using their publication of it. A hotel proposed near Union Station is now set to incorporate one existing structure, not two, as was originally proposed. A hotel proposed near Union Station is now set to incorporate one existing structure, not two, as originally proposed. Union Station. Remember that tax thing that we just read about? Denver-based McNichols Partnership, led by Randy McNichols, originally proposed a hotel that would replace the parking lot at the corner of 17th and Blake Streets in June 2022. While the bulk of the project would be new construction, plans originally called for the hotel to incorporate both the existing building at 1702 Wazee Street, which is currently a private residence known as the Red House, and the 3-story office building at 1725 Blake Street. But the 1725 Blake Street building, which was proposed to have event, spa, fitness space, is no longer part of the project according to the updated development plan submitted by the city. Commentary, which means it's just the residents. On to the next one. Will Denver still have cranes in the skyline 5 years from now? The answer could affect your cost of living. Commentary. This article talks about the problems from being able to freely develop what we need versus only developing that which the developers demand. The whole reason you have industries is to meet the needs of folks. Then along the way, they make some money. But if they're coming to you and say, like, we're not going to build what you need, we only want to make money, and so this is what we're providing, and you're going to have to live with it, man, that's upside down. And this article is a demonstration of just how upside down it has gotten. Construction cranes have defined Denver's downtown skyline for more than a decade, offering visual reminder of the city's relentless growth. New apartments and condos and office buildings have risen across town, from the River North Art District to Golden Triangle, Union Station, Cherry Creek North, Loretta Heights, Central Park, and Sun Valley. Today's rising developments were born from yesterday's plans, policies, and investments. It takes some years to get from visioning to implementation. It takes, quote, it takes some years to get from visioning to implementation, to developers getting all of their funding stacks together, explained Deidre Oz, who oversees the large development reviews in the Community Planning and Development, the city's planning department. All right, middle of the article rant. So she's right about it takes years to get from the visioning to the implementation. But that precisely is why city leaders in the planning department are partly to blame for our housing crisis. These are the policymakers. Their failure to plan for the development of low cost housing instead of luxury developments, commonly named market rate or mixed use. Don't be fooled. When these terms are used, they always are a signal for coming luxury developments. And that's what we got in the areas that were listed. The planner's failure to see that something else was developed is one of the reasons we're in this housing mess. For the same cost of the developer to build fewer numbers of large luxury units, they could have built a higher number of budget units and helped to meet the needs and help to meet the housing needs of the city. I can see it now at the awards ceremony where these city officials are being honored by the developer for doing such a good job at the developer's behalf. Oh, this person in the city was so helpful for allowing us to develop a luxury project when they very well could have told us to build some inexpensive housing. So we're very thankful that they went for us on the luxury product rather than requiring a project that was affordable to the masses. So the city contact, here, enjoy your fancy dinner, drink your fancy wine. We brought you a fancy plaque to hang on your wall to remember the event. And just for good measure, here are the keys to my mountain getaway anytime you want to make a ski trip. I would say it's been great doing business with you, but more appropriately, I should say it's been great having you do business for us. Truth of the matter is they plan for these luxury level developments in these areas. Thus, over the time, they're partly responsible for the housing shortage at the policy level. Back to the article. Investors and developers were bullish on Denver's growth during most of Mayor Hancock's first two terms, but some developers' optimism has since dried up. In just under 2 years, starting under Hancock's last term and leading into the current Mayor Mike Johnson's first term, developers have submitted fewer plans for new multifamily residential buildings in Denver. Some in the real estate industry caution that fewer proposals mean that in 5 to 10 years, there may no longer be massive cranes scattered across the skyline. Denver would see far fewer apartments and condos under construction, with fewer homes being built. Home prices and rents would likely to surge again. Commentary. Were they afraid that the new mayor might appoint someone of integrity to these positions in the planning department? I'm sure they are well pleased. I'm sure they were well pleased with the very purchasable Mike Johnson. We're not talking just about a single person. We're not talking just about a single person that can be purchased. We're talking about the whole administration. Commentary. As if there are not other builders who might build more reasonable projects if you'd ask them to. Problem is they try to fill you with fear and scarcity that if they don't do it, no one will. So you should be so thankful for their willingness to even consider to develop in your area. The more the real estate industry can make you believe that there's not enough housing, the more they can charge you for the housing that is on the market. There have been rumors in the city that there's available housing that's not on the market. Rumors of entire apartment buildings that no one lives in, hence artificially creating a shortage that may not actually exist, or may not exist to the extent that we think that it does. Are you familiar with the rental registry? This is a newly passed piece of legislation in the last couple of years. The idea of the registry is that if you're going to rent a unit, you first need to register it with the city so that the city knows what's actually out there. The registry was supposed to go into effect in January 2023. There was about 15% compliance. Those who failed to register were subject to fines, which the city would have to enforce. And instead of enforcing those fines, the city gave a grace period, which recently ended. At the end of the grace period, there was less than a 50% compliance. So failing to hold the owners of the property accountable didn't lead to them being responsible. Go figure. In the city, quote, in the city and county of Denver, there are currently 18,700 units under construction, end quote. Scott Rathburn, head of the Apartment Appraisers and Consultants, said. They've broken ground, and once you break ground on a deal, you're going to finish the deal. Most of the units will be delivered by 2027. We're going to see a lot of cranes in the skyline in the city of Denver for the next 3 years, he said. Another 29,000 market rate units and 2,900 subsidized units are going through the permitting pipeline, according to Rathburn. Commentary. And our need is exactly for the inverse. So rather than building more housing for people who are already housed, we should be building more housing for people who are not housed to get them off the streets. The other thing to notice that they didn't tell you was the level of subsidized units that have been submitted. Are these 80% AMI units, or are they in that 30 to, or in that are they in that needed 30 to 60% range, like what they're building in Durango with that hotel conversion, which around here we think is a pretty good idea. Let's continue. But about 6,000 of those were proposed before the expandable affordability rules went into effect on June 30th, 2022. These policies require that developers build more affordable housing every time they create market rate multifamily property. So they submitted these before they were required to build housing that's going to house people. After they were in place, new proposals for market rate housing plummeted the city. One big difference between Denver and those counties was passing the expanding affordability rules, a law intended to create more housing stock where people could actually afford to live. But if the law slows down the creation of housing, it could backfire, suggests Rathburn. Now remember, this Rathburn guy, he's the head of the Apartment Appraisers and Consultants. So he personally benefits by doing fewer deals at higher end to make more money personally. He wants a market to look like that. He could care. He just wants every deal that he sticks his hands on, and he can only stick his hands on so many deals, to be as large a deals as possible to collect the commission, to collect the largest commission that he can. This is who they're getting the quote from. Let's try it one more time. But if the law slows down the creation of housing, it could backfire, says Rathburn. This is the head of a firm called Apartment Appraisers and Consultants. He's doing a sales job on you here to try to convince you that to build more housing for more people is a bad idea, and that developers should be allowed to build as only on the high end. Quote, When we see the reduction of cranes in the next 5 years, we're also going to see rents skyrocket, said the guy who's the lead of apartment appraisers and consultants. If you're appraising apartments and you predict that the rents are going to go up and you find any excuse to make the rents go up, you're going to be excited. Final commentary on this article. There's a lot more in this article when it comes to how development is being framed and who the framing is set to benefit. But we're going to leave it just there for now. Hopefully, when you finish the rest of the article, you'll get an idea of who it is that they're asking about this and the way it's being framed to benefit the person that they're asking the most. Wow, last 10 pages of script. This is a long one, folks.